I'm Bezzerides. Thank you for joining us for this episode number 15. The goal of this podcast is to give you, Orthodox clergy and lay leaders, the knowledge, tools, and resources you need to be better stewards of your influence and have greater impact on the organizations you lead. I'm here today with Deacon Michael Hyatt. How are you, Deacon Michael?
I'm doing great. I'm just looking forward to doing this with you tonight and talking about all things technology.
I am too. I took a peek at where we're going and thought, oh, he was spying on what our office conversation was this week. So it's very relevant. So I'm excited.
Good. I hope it's relevant.
Yeah, no, it's so good. Today we're going to be talking about inaccessible information and why that's a barrier to good communication. Deacon Michael, why is this important?
Well, it can be a real obstacle. I mean, we can't find a file or reference an email conversation or locate some important document. You were telling me before we got on today that you struggled with that a little bit yesterday. That becomes a huge obstacle to good communication. At best, it slows down communication, and at worst, it forces you to hesitate or procrastinate. Why? Because it can cost you a lot of time in trying to find stuff that's not readily available, or in the worst case, force you to recreate it. And fortunately, we've got 4 rules to, quote, simplify your tech stack. Okay. Am I talking a foreign language? Maybe. You can explain it, Ann. But this will enable you to find what you need when you need it.
Okay. So if you are like me and heard Deacon Michael say tech stack and panicked that he is, in fact, speaking a different language, let me share a quick word of encouragement from the church world. We have many different categories of listeners on this podcast. We have listeners who are lay people and are listening to this podcast for their personal work lives. We've gotten some emails on this, and they're wonderful. We think you folks will find this podcast super useful because it probably overlaps with your own struggles pretty closely. Then we have those of us who are lay leaders or clergy in the church who are listening to this podcast for their work in churches and church organizations. And parishes and our church organizations really run the gamut on how tech savvy we are, with the general trend being towards not very tech savvy. So let this podcast be an encouragement. Wherever you are on the spectrum of tech use, if you come away with 1 or 2 ideas of how you can make your parish or your organization just a little bit better, take it 1 or 2 steps from where it is now to just 1 notch of improvement on communication, that's a huge win. So think of the framing questions for today as, what are the ways in which technology helps or hinders your ministry? What are your current stories of jumbled communication? As you listen to Deacon Michael tell his, what are yours? And what are the 1 or 2 steps that you can take to streamline and make your communication more effective? How does that sound, Deacon Michael?
That sounds great. I'm excited about it. We're going to do our very best to make this relevant. I wanted to say also that if you're a pastor or somebody that preaches on a regular basis, and I know it's not just priests. As a deacon, I preach frequently, and even some lay people preach. So I'm going to give you at the end of this some of my best technology hacks for people that are trying to prepare sermons or homilies.
Awesome. All right, so as we begin, we'd love to encourage you to post your questions in the comments section of YouTube or wherever you happen to be watching. Deacon Michael will be answering those questions live in the second half of our show. If you want to ask that question anonymously, you can text us at 615-721-2303. Deacon Michael, teach us.
Okay, let me start with kind of my story. I love technology. I taught myself several programming languages. I thought at one time I wanted to be a programmer. I actually started a business to do programming, but those pesky customers kept getting in the way because they would say, well, that doesn't make sense. Help me fix this. Help me figure this out. And I thought, this is not my temperament. I don't have the patience for this. So I got out of it, but I still love tech. I mean, if people could see the setup that I have right now, this is basically the Starship Enterprise. So I've got all the tech tools and all that. So I love it. But it can become a problem when you have too many tech tools, particularly when you're trying to collaborate with other people. That's where it's a problem. So years ago, we were having an executive team meeting in our office, and we were discussing whether or not we had had this conversation previously about the draft of a new policy. And so Joel, who's our chief content officer, said, just in frustration, he said, if I hear that one more time, I'm going to lose my mind. And Joel is not somebody that's given to hyperbole. And so we knew this was something that we really needed to listen to. So someone said, I feel like we've just had this conversation. And somebody else said, well, there's got to be meeting notes somewhere. And somebody else said, well, I think we talked about it in Slack. And somebody said, are you sure? I thought that was in email. And somebody said, I thought I remembered pulling that up in Evernote. Somebody else said, I think it might be in a Google Doc. And we kind of all looked at each other and laughed. And we said, what is going on here? How can this be happening? And it was really an impediment to the conversation that we were trying to have. So we decided as a company that we had to do better. After all, Faux Focus, our company, is a content company, and we publish literally millions of words every year. We run on information. So here's the thing I think that we have to remember, whether we're in a church or a nonprofit or a for-profit or whatever, but progress in any organization doesn't happen without good communication. You may be able to do that as a solopreneur. You may be able to do that if you don't have to worry about a parish council and you're just the sole decision maker. But if it takes a team of any kind, it's going to require good communication. And here's the thing. Progress depends on good communication, but complexity is the enemy of progress. And it's time to stop the madness and come up with a better solution. And for us, it meant what I said earlier, and again, I don't want to scare you, but simplifying our tech stack. The more tools you use, the more complex and confusing everything becomes. So, Ann, I want to define what a tech stack is. It's the combination of tools that you use for communication. It's that simple. It's the combination of the tools that you use for communication. That includes the tools you use for document writing and sharing, the tools you use for email, for texting, social media management, messaging apps, presentation and design software, note-taking apps, project management tools, calendars, video conferencing, all the rest. So what I want to share today with all of us is basically, I want to pull this back up where the two of us are here, is basically 4 rules for simplifying your tech stack and just make life more manageable with technology.
I love it. As I think about this, and I think about, organizations and parishes that are currently super low tech, I think just whatever you have, just start there. Whatever is working, that's your current tech stack, and write it up. The other thing that I can't help think right now is that I work with a lot of young adults, and through our Telos project, it's always been, how can young adults get really engaged in the church and help? And one of the areas that they really want to help, and just putting this out here now, is with tech and churches. And, I was with this wonderful priest earlier this week in Indianapolis, and Father Peter Orfanakos in Orange, Connecticut. And he said his Goyans, his high school youth, figure out how he does everything, what he does with his phone and everything. And he just passes it off and says, I need your help with this.
That's
and
awesome.
That's how I help. Yeah, it really is. And so for those of you who may be listening or are thinking, how do I move forward at my parish level? Just know that this is the perfect area in which to engage young adults who are tech entrepreneurs in these areas.
I think it's important to realize that people that are coming to your parish, if you're a pastor, are by and large coming out of, the adults are by and large coming out of the corporate world where they're used to the latest technology. They're used to using these tools. They have a certain expectation for how things ought to run, how collaboration happens. And many of those young people are drawn to the church because, we're old, we're venerable, yeah, we're trustworthy, we're ancient, we've got all that. But not when it comes to technology. If you want to turn those same people off, just have some clunky technology like I was sharing with you beforehand, in our own church, we need to do a little bit better job on this because, I was sharing with you, we don't really have any email management software that gives people an opportunity to opt in to the messages that would be relevant to them. So everybody gets everything. Now in the corporate world, we would feel like we're being spammed, right? I'm getting messages from my own church about the women's group is meeting on Tuesday night, and the youth department is going to be meeting on Saturday after Vespers, and I'm getting all this stuff that's just not relevant to me. The problem is when you get a lot of irrelevant communication, and I hate to say this, but you kind of tune it all out, right? And so then you miss important messages. So if you want to be relevant, if you want people to be in the know and to understand what you're trying to communicate, if you're the pastor, you've got to provide a mechanism so that the relevant messages hit the right people. Otherwise, it's just a blizzard of information. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. So helpful. Not easy, but so helpful. So helpful.
Okay, so let's get into these 4 rules. We can talk through these, and then I want to get to the sermon prep stuff too, because I think that'll be fun for people that have to prepare a homily. Okay.
Great.
So rule number 1 is this. Stop chasing the perfect solution. Now, I'm kind of talking to the choir here. And by the choir, I mean me, because I'm one of these people that I just love new stuff. I love novelty. I love technology, but I can give my organization whiplash. I mean, I give myself whiplash because the new thing that comes out, I want to test it. I want to try it. And I can think about this. And like if I was thinking about task management systems, like some people like me are in this never ending quest to find the perfect task manager, the perfect tool that'll organize my tasks. But here's reality. There's no perfect solution out there. There's for sure no solution that's going to work without your direct involvement. All of them require your work. And so just pick one. Stop chasing the perfect solution. Settle into one, because all of them are going to have pluses. All of them are going to have minuses. Do your research. I'm not suggesting you don't do that. But eventually you have to settle into one, and there's going to be some limitations of that one. For example, there were times in the past where I, loved Google Docs. I loved it for its simplicity, for its shareability, for its collaboration. And I highly recommend it. I mean, I'm going to be recommending this in more detail here in a moment. But Google Docs has kind of just the most basic feature set. It's not really fancy, but it's got 90% of what 90% of the people use.
Yeah.
But occasionally I go, I think I need to go back to Microsoft Word because it's got everything, right? It's got every bell and whistle. And some people kind of explain it as bloatware. It's just gotten more and more bloated over the years, but there's everything. And it's too confusing. And so if you go back and forth between these and nobody knows what you're going to use and nobody gets really trained on your team to use one or the other one, just pick one. Word's got its limitations. Apple Pages has its limitations. Google Docs has its limitations. But stop searching for the perfect tool. It doesn't exist.
Yeah. The one caveat I would say is if you bought into this rule 30 years ago and stopped chasing the perfect tool, then you might want to just look again to see if there's a new tool.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. And really what I'm talking about is the perfect tool for your organization. Like I do I still do all this experimenting on the side. Like I'm a big user of Notion. Like our show notes for this program, we do those in Notion. Had you ever used it before, Ann?
I hadn't. No, I really like it.
Yeah, it's amazing. But guess what I discovered? There's a new kid on the block.
Yeah.
There's one that kind of has one-upped Notion that has a lot of feature parity and some advanced features. It's called Coda. But guess what? I'm playing with it, but I'm not imposing it on my team because they will pull their hair out and probably fire me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, it's interesting. There are, I was joking about the 30 years ago, but truly many parishes built their websites 20 years ago or
I
15
know.
years ago, right? And you could chase a new solution. Like, so it's a spectrum and you've got to know yourself. Like, are you the person who always wants to push tech use and therefore you got to dial it back? Or do you never want to adapt something new and look at it, adopt something new? And so do you need to sort of open your eyes to that? So I think, yeah.
Good. All right, let's
Yeah.
get to the second rule,
Sounds great.
which is this: approve one tool per function. Now, here's what I mean by that. We decided to do this as an organization to limit ourselves to one tool per function. Per function. So, for example, we've decided on Google Docs on the G Suite set of tools. Why? Because for personal work, our team members can use whatever they want. But for collaborative work, we pick one tool and stick with it. And the reason for that is because it allows everybody to have the same platform, to be able to read the same documents, to be trained on the same tool so that they gain proficiency with it. So, for example, in our organization, sometimes we'll say, well, look, if you want to use Google Sheets to track your expenses, fine. But when it comes time to share them with your organization, you have to use a tool that we use called Expensify, so that we can make sure that everybody's using the exact same tools, so that the accounting department doesn't have to look at 15 different solutions and try to figure out how to get these expense reports into our accounting system. And that may not be relevant to a parish, but you get the idea. Or just take, how are we going to communicate with text messages? Are we going to use Slack? Are we going to use WhatsApp? Are we going to use just our messages? And we decided if it's urgent communication, text is fine. But for just routine communication internally, we use Slack. We never use email for internal communication for a variety of reasons, which I can get into if somebody asks about it. But we always use Slack for internal communication and email for external communication. But one tool, to rule them all. When it comes to presentation software, and again, if you have to make a presentation in a classroom, or you have to make a presentation to your donors, or you're doing, a parish council meeting, or you're doing an annual retreat, or whatever it is, for us, we don't use PowerPoint. PowerPoint's perfectly fine. We use Keynote, right? So we settled on one tool so that everybody can use it, everybody's familiar with it, and it makes it so much easier to do it that way.
Great. So rule 1 is stop chasing the perfect solution. Rule 2, approve one tool per function. Do you have a set of tools that are your faves?
We do. And this is kind of our approved list. So here's what it is. So G Suite for document creation, sharing, and storage. So that would include Google Docs and Google Sheets. Google Drive is where we store all of our documents. But like the accounting department may have the need to use Excel internally because it honestly is more powerful than Google Sheets, although Google Sheets is quickly catching up. But if they want to share something with the rest of the team, that gets shared on Google Sheets because we don't speak Excel. Asana for project management and task management. I know that's what you guys use in your organization,
Yep.
Ann.
We love it.
Yeah, I love it too. And then Gmail for external communication. And Gmail can run on a variety of email clients. I happen to use Spark on the Mac, but some people just use the native Gmail interface, and that's fine, but it's got to be Gmail. Slack for internal communication, as I said before. Google Calendar for all calendar management. This is huge, and we have different calendars broken out. Like we have a promotional calendar. I have a calendar just for church-related stuff. I have a calendar just related to stuff that's for St. Vladimir Seminary, where I serve as the executive chair. I have stuff for a calendar just for personal stuff. But I'm able to share any of those calendars with anybody else. So my executive assistant has access to all those, and I personally don't schedule anything, almost nothing, without going through him. Then Keynote for presentations and Zoom for video conferencing and for webinars.
We're almost the same. We
Really?
love all of those. Yeah, we are. Asana, Gmail, Slack, Google Calendar, Zoom. I will say PowerPoint has some very fancy design ideas functions that makes your slides look beautiful. So, but we haven't, so we're still back and forth Keynote to PowerPoint. But
Yeah,
to your point, yeah.
There's a lot of things I like about PowerPoint.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's good when there's two big competitors like that in the same space.
Yeah.
There's like Prezi, is another one that's out there.
Yeah.
Google has, what's it called? They have their version.
Yeah.
Is it as simple as Google Slides? I can't remember.
I think it's Google Slides. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of it, there's a lot of competitors, but the good thing is that competition keeps all these companies sharp and constantly developing, new things. So
yeah.
That's good.
And actually, the nice thing is they're not that hard to convert from one to another.
No, they're not.
Now. Yeah.
Yeah, so I often get PowerPoint presentations from people, and I can load them right up into Keynote. And I'm assuming the same thing works in reverse.
Yep, it does. That's great.
Cool.
Okay, so take us to rule number 3.
Rule number 3, communicate in open channels. So with a messaging application like Slack, or what is the Microsoft Teams is another one. Facebook has its own for businesses. It's possible to communicate with just one person, or you can communicate with a group within a team, or an entire team, or the whole division, or even a company. But without a clear guideline, communications are going to default to one of two extremes. So senders will either send to the widest possible audience that may be interested, kind of like my church, creating a barrage of unnecessary communication for almost everyone, or they resort to private messages so as not to disturb others. And that generally leads to repeated messages as conversations have broadened, and both are a waste of time. So a good rule of thumb is to communicate on a public platform, but include only those that need to see the message. And the thing that we like about Slack, Ann, is that we're able to bring other people into the conversation. Like, let's just say you were having a conversation with several people at church. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, but this is actually relevant. We forgot to add so-and-so. How do you catch them up on the conversation that's transpired? Well, in Slack, you just add them to that channel where that conversation was happening, and everybody gets, and you can turn this on or off, but they get all the history. So they can go back, read all the conversation that's happened before, get access to all the files that were shared before, and be up to speed. That's huge.
That's huge.
And so having that kind of open channel is really good. But here's the other cool thing about in Slack. You can make a channel private so that you can just keep the conversation, like on a sensitive topic or whatever, confined to just those people. Nobody else can get access to it unless you give them permission. So it's kind of this.
I'm just thinking about this. It would be fun to just spitball. Okay, let's say you adopt Slack for a parish, and then the channels are conversations around ministry initiatives. And there are people, leaders, who cycle on and off those ministry initiatives. By keeping them in channels, they could be up to speed. They could go back and read important conversations and things that have transpired prior to them.
Totally.
That would be helpful information.
I do that in my own company. Like, there are some channels that I don't belong to, but they're public channels, and I can join them if I want. So nobody has to take initiative. I can join it if I want to. So I might dip into it occasionally and just kind of catch up, and then I'm out of it. Now, I can't log into a private channel unless somebody adds me to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the permission control.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Slack has been a game changer for us, especially it was vital. I actually fought it until COVID, until quarantine.
Oh, wow.
My team was on. Not that I fought it, I just didn't have time to get on, and it felt overwhelming. And now that I'm on, I can't imagine life without it, actually.
Well, the thing that I finally got with Slack that I think is amazing, it actually builds and facilitates culture.
Yeah.
Because it's just fun, and we do a lot of fun things. We have fun channels, like we have one called Weekend Wins, where people can share on Monday, what happened, share pictures of their kids or their grandkids. And it just helps build that connection between members of our community that's enormously helpful. But if you're thinking about Slack or you've never heard of Slack, here's what I would recommend that you do. If you're thinking about doing this in your church or you're thinking about doing it with your organization, do it as a test. So we introduced it about maybe 6 years ago. I'd have to go back and look to be sure, but we've been using it for years, right after it first came out. And so I said to the team, I said, I don't know about you guys, but I am so over email. I'm tired of trying to catch up on conversations and trying to find, okay, where was that message? And it's embedded in a thread, all these messages deep. And so I said, let's try Slack. Let's try it for 1 week. But here's what I'm going to ask is that we don't send no emails to one another. Communicate with the outside world, fine. They're not in Slack. Use email for that. But for us internally, I want to force all the communications here. We'll circle back up in a week and then we'll vote. And I promise you, everybody's going to get one vote. And if we decide that we're going to go forward, we'll go forward. And if you decide that you hate it, we'll go back to email. So we did it. And a week later, everybody voted and it was unanimous. Everybody said, we love this tool. We definitely want to use this. And we've been happily using it ever since. We didn't try Microsoft Teams, but there was a competitor to Slack that came out, 3 or 4 years ago. And we tried that for about 2 days and we said, nope, we're back to Slack.
It's great.
So
we
great
love
tool.
Slack too. And it, as I said, it took me a while, but now, knowing we can have threads with just the right people who need to be a part of a conversation, can have private conversations with people. I think the one question I would have for you on Slack is when a conversation turns into something you've discovered that you want to implement or want to capture, do you have a sort of a rhythm for taking conversation in Slack to make sure it sort of doesn't get lost in a thread somewhere, but actually circles into?
Well, what I do personally,
yeah,
I use the bookmark function. So I save that message and I can just go back to my saved messages. So let's just say that somebody let's say Jim, my assistant, says, oh, by the way, here's what you need to talk about with our clients in the client call tomorrow on Zoom. And so I don't have to remember where it is. I just save that and then I go to the saved messages and it's right there. And when I'm done with it, I unsave it and it disappears. So I only keep the high priority relative messages there.
That's fabulous.
It's a good tool.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Okay. So rule 1, stop chasing the perfect solution. Rule 2, approve one tool per function. Rule 3, communicate in open channels. What is rule 4?
Rule 4 is perform file hygiene. Some of you didn't know you needed to do this, but it's awesome if you can have one place where all the files for your organization are stored and where they're available or accessible to anybody that might need them. So we use Google Drive for this, and we have probably about, 50 people that have access to that. And Google Drive allows you also to control the permissions and everything. So, using their shared drive system, our finance team can keep all the files that are relevant only to them and to the executive team there, but they can turn off the permissions for the people that don't need access to those documents. But what it does is that instead of passing files around through email, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but you keep going, okay, what was the most recent version of that file? And you can never find it, right? It's just like, you do a bunch of work on a file and then somebody says, I hate to tell you this, but there's actually a more recent version of that file. You were working on an old version of that file, and now you got to somehow merge these two together. Right? Have you ever been there?
Well, Word does have a way you can merge those, but so yes, I have been there.
Yeah. And so just like you want to pull your hair out. So what we do is we store them on a central server, which is Google Drive. And, if you don't know how to set this up, get somebody to set it up for you. There's probably somebody in your church or your parish or in your organization that could set it up. And then just start saving everything so that this is a key thing, there's a single source of truth. That's what you want. You want a place where you know that, if I'm looking for the vision script for my organization or the core values, there's one place I need to look. That's in a folder on Google Drive, and I have the single source of truth. The other thing I would say too is adopt in your organization a file naming convention. So don't just, some people want to put the date at the end of the file and they want to do it in the conventional, month, day, year format. This is a little hack. I've been doing this for decades. But when you name a file that has date sensitive information, like let's say you're taking meeting notes from a parish council meeting or an executive committee meeting or a board meeting or a one-on-one meeting, you want to save those and you want to always know what date they pertain to. Enter the date of the meeting first, but do it in this format. Year, like 2022, period, 04, period, 03, and then a dash, and then what the meeting was about or what the meeting was. That way, it'll always sort first by the year, then by the month, then by the day, and then the meeting topic. So if you can discipline yourself to do that, it makes a world of difference.
That's great.
All right. Should we get to what I don't have a point for this, but I thought it would be fun to talk about tools that are available for you in preparing homilies.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay, so here's my process. And, I've been doing public speaking for decades, and I frequently do it now, usually several times a week. But for me, everything usually begins in Notion. But you could use Google Docs if you wanted to. But I use Notion for my preparation of any keynote, any sermon, anything. And I generally start with an outline, but a very high level outline. And so one of the tools that I've adopted and used extensively is the SCORE system, SCORRE, SCORE with 2 R's. SCORE is actually a conference that was founded by my good friend Ken Davis. I used to be an owner of this company. I'm no longer an owner in this company. I don't have any vested interest in this, but this is phenomenal training on speaking. And they teach you a very systematic way to prepare, but it all begins with coming up with an objective statement and then coming up with sort of your rationale or the points that you're going to make. So that always begins for me in Notion. But when I'm doing my research, these are some tech tools that are available. And by the way, if you use Google Docs or Notion, either one, you can share those with somebody on your team if you want to. Like I'll share the Notion document with Ann so that she can literally comment right in the document. If I don't want her changing something, I could change the permissions and then she could comment just like Google Docs. She could comment without disturbing the text, and I would have to accept her changes in order for them to be incorporated into the document. Okay, so get a good tool for processing, whatever it is. Word, Google Docs, Notion, doesn't matter, pick a tool. But here's some tools that are amazing that are out there. First of all, just for Bible research. My favorite tool, and it's not cheap, so if you're a pastor, find yourself a sponsor that'll help you pay for this. But it's called Logos, Logos, and look it up on the internet. It is basically built for scholars, biblical scholars, for pastors, for anybody doing biblical research. They have thousands of additional volumes outside of the biblical text that comments on the biblical text. So this is, for the most part, a Protestant organization that published this, that produced it, but they also have Roman Catholic version of it and an Orthodox version of it. They've got, for example, the entire ante-Nicene, Nicene, and post-Nicene fathers, all completely indexed so that you can do a search. If you were teaching on baptism, or the baptism of Jesus, you could do a search lightning fast like that and get every reference in those volumes to the baptism of Jesus. Now, and the cool thing about it, and you were asking about this earlier, but then you could also click into that reference and see the whole context. The other thing I like when I'm studying the Bible, if I highlight a word, I can right click on the word and it will give me the Greek or the Hebrew, depending on the Old Testament or the New Testament. And it will give me, I can do a whole word study. It'll show me all kinds of information about that Greek word or that Hebrew word. where else it's used, how many times it's used, a whole, you could totally geek out on this. And I love this stuff. There's another tool. So, and like if you're studying geography, right inside Logos, you can pull up a map of where that happened. So especially when you're looking at the ancient world where countries were called by a different name or they don't exist anymore, this gives you a sense of, where all this stuff is happening geographically. You can pull in all kinds of commentaries, and they've got a gazillion commentaries and good Orthodox commentaries too that you can use. But I was sharing with you this tool before we started, and this is so fun. It's called Catena, Catena. Gail, could you go ahead and put that, Gail or John, put that in the comments. Catena, Catena. Now, this is published by a Roman Catholic organization, but when you download it onto your phone, like I've got it right here on my phone, you're not going to be able to see this, but nope, you can't see it. But at any rate, you can get the Orthodox version, and that's what you want. Because if you're Orthodox, you don't really want to know what the Roman Catholic saints, particularly after the Great Schism, said. You want to go back and look at the old stuff that's Orthodox, right? And so here's what's cool. Like if I'm looking at Ephesians 4, verse 4, there is one body and one spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling. If I click on that, and this is true for every verse in the Bible, if I click on that, it will tell me that there's 8 references to that particular verse. So there's Clement of Rome, Cyprian of Carthage, Ignatius of Antioch, Jerome, John Chrysostom, Tertullian of Carthage. That is amazing. Now, here's what I don't think it does give you is the context, but that's okay. You can go find it if you want to. But it is great for finding relevant patristic quotes for the stuff that you're preaching on. And I use it all the time.
Those are great shares you just passed along. Thank you for those.
It just makes it easier, to get to what you need faster than doing all the research, online. And that's what these tools are really designed to do. And the research is what takes so long. You still have to do the research, and you still have to determine whether it's relevant, and you still have to make sure that you're not pulling it out of context or proof texting.
Well, and that's what, as the person who did her dissertation on Chrysostom, I would want to read the Chrysostom quote, then find it in its original context and read the whole sermon to make sure that I was doing the right exegesis. And so that's the one thing to always, I think, be aware of. And yet to know quickly who said what, so you even have that starting place, is just a game changer.
Well, that's the key for somebody like you. It gives you a place to start.
Yeah.
So you're not just going like, I wonder if Chrysostom said anything about this particular passage. Well, this will tell you. Yeah, he did, in fact. And it may be out of context and maybe something you don't ultimately use, but it gives you a starting place to go look.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right. Well, so we have one really important question I saw from Randa that I want to get to.
Okay.
But before I do that, let me just summarize. Progress in any organization doesn't happen without good communication. That's been the whole topic of our series. Complexity is the enemy of progress. The more tools you use, the more complex and confusing everything becomes. This means we need to simplify our tech stacks. So Deacon Michael suggests we use 4 rules for doing this. Rule 1, stop chasing the perfect solution. Rule 2, approve 1 tool per function. Rule 3, communicate in open channels. And Rule 4, perform file hygiene. Okay, with that, I want to get to Randa's great question here. She says, I like Slack and see the efficiency, but the whole board that she works with hasn't bought in yet, and I haven't figured out why. Do you have some thoughts about why people wouldn't want to use it? And I definitely do, but I'll be interested in your instincts.
Well, this is where I think you've got to almost say, look, this is how we're doing it, and this is the only way we're going to communicate. And then you got to sell it. You got to give your why and explain what are the advantages. And by the way, I have a couple of articles on my website at fullfocus.co about Slack that might help you sell it to your organization. But I would make the case. Make the case and say from this point forward, if you want to communicate with the board, it's got to be in Slack. Okay? And we'll be happy to give you a 30-minute training that'll get you up to speed. I think you guys will love it, but that's how we're going to communicate going forward. If you give people a workaround, like, if you don't want to use it, you can use email. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to use what's familiar, and then you're going to be really screwed up because now you're going to have two sources of truth, right? You're going to have some messages are in email, some are in Slack. I'm not sure where to look, and everybody's confused. So I would just do that. I would make the case, and then I would mandate the change.
Yeah. I would say, as somebody who was a slow adopter, working with a lot of millennial and Gen Zs as we got up to speed, and I had a lot going on, managing, a lot of juggling balls in the air, and so was slower to get on Slack. I think what I needed and what I could imagine working well, Randa, would be you spending meeting time every meeting, socializing people into finding things on Slack, so that if you're doing Zoom meetings, you actually you say, okay, now everybody on a screen pull up Slack and go through it. Or you might want to start with a Zoom sharing of screen and actually show people where things are and walk them through it, but make it feel less scary, and show people where things are. But if you actually used it in meetings and were patient with everybody who's taking a longer time to find the right channel, and then actually used it. So, say, I just dropped a document in this channel. Go find the document in this channel. And then people slowly begin to see. The other thing the weekend wins and the pictures is a really good idea. People will, just out of sheer curiosity, the more fun stuff will look for, and then if you've created FOMO, so that people don't want to miss the fun stuff, that might work too.
That's cool. Yeah, I love the idea of using some team training time to walk through some of the features, like that little hack I shared with you earlier about how I save things, and then I go to my save folder or my saved channel to find that. You might just show that. I mean, I would keep it short, like 5 minutes, like, hey, by the way, here's a tip that I learned. One of the things that we do inside of Slack too is we require everybody, when they initiate a message, to start a thread with a subject title, just like you would have in an email message. And we put that in bold. And then everybody that responds to that message responds using the Slack thread function. So you don't get these conversations where things are interrupted by other topics and all that kind of stuff. Everything stays right with that topic.
That's great. Related to this, so we are using Asana as a team, and in our weekly team huddle, we actually have baked in the schedule of our huddle an Asana moment of the week. And somebody just shares one way that Asana has been super helpful that week. And usually 2 or 3 others of us go, oh my gosh, yeah, that's amazing. Or one of us has used it in totally the wrong way, and somebody younger has to correct me,
Do you know what I heard you say when you said that? For like just a nanosecond, you said, in our team meetings, we have a sauna moment.
It does sound like.
And I'm thinking, that's a good idea. Okay, go to the sauna. Yeah.
Does sound like that. We thought to have a jacuzzi moment, and then we're all good. We've called it, in our office, we've jokingly started calling Asana ascesis.
Ascesis. I love it.
Yep. The discipline to do our work. Yeah.
That's good. Gail, my wife, asked this question: could you do a whole podcast episode on Slack with tips, etc.? I'm not sure a whole episode would be relevant, Gail, to this audience, but maybe.
Yeah.
You see what
That's a good one,
Randa said?
Randa. Yeah, that's a good one,
He
Randa.
said, how do you have a Zoom sauna? Yeah, if you can figure that out. They have break rooms, but do they have sauna rooms?
Right. Apparently, we're getting to the spot where you will feel heat.
I know. Do we have any other questions? Did you see any other ones?
I did not see any other ones. Uh, yeah, and I'm trying to think of, of the people I know and the struggles we have. If you were trying to convince, you know, okay, here's one. You want to try to convince your parish to uh, go one notch up, Deacon Michael, and segment the email chains. Thoughts around that?
Yeah, I would probably start with either ConvertKit or MailChimp.
Yep.
Those are both email programs. And I would set it up so that people could opt into specific lists.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be some messages, for example, that you want to send to every list in your parish. You want the women to get it. You want the youth to get it, or parents with youth. You want the seniors to get it. You want everybody to get it. Great. Just check all those lists. Everybody gets it.
Yeah.
But you can segment and segregate the messages so that they're highly relevant, because you don't want people to stop listening or stop paying attention.
So would you then do sort of a list audit once a year when you send people around, sort of a opt-in, opt-out choice again, to say on the list all you want, and are there changes you want to make?
Well, typically what happens is, by law, you have to have a link in the bottom of an email like that is
Right.
an unsubscribe button, or even better yet, manage your email preferences. And if you click on that link, you're going to go to a page where you can opt in or out of various lists. I mean, there have been lists I've been on, like things like the New York Times, for example, or the Guardian, or some big news site, where if you go to that manage email preferences, they may have 12 or 15 different lists that you could be on.
Mm.
And maybe you're subscribed to all of them. Maybe you're subscribed to one of them. But that gives people an opportunity to self-manage it on their side, where they can clean it up themselves. For example, if somebody says to you, why do you keep sending me these email messages related to seniors? I'm 25. And you say, well, click on email preferences and opt out of that list. I'm not sure how you got on it, but you're on it, so opt out.
That's great. Gail has some great questions here for us. How do you deal with information you've saved in different places but are moving to one place of truth?
Yeah, so what I would do, I literally just did this recently, because I've got kind of my own version of this from my own personal life. So what I did was I let all the information remain where it was, but then I set up a new folder structure on a new shared drive, and then I gradually, and I'm still not done, migrated the information there.
Yeah, that's great. So in other words, you would look first to your new place of truth, and then if for some reason it hasn't migrated there, you'd know where to look for it, and you wouldn't have lost it there.
And then I just move it over as I have need for it. And then slowly but surely, I'm populating the new drive, the new single source of truth, with the information from the old drive, so that it's in one place and it's organized like I want it. Speaking
of organizing things, do you have your favorite password protector, saver of all your passwords?
Yes, absolutely. 1Password.
Okay. Yep.
There's other ones out there. There's a lot of other ones out there, but 1Password, especially for teams, is fabulous. We have our whole team on it. And so you can create separate vaults for different teams, so that my email passwords are available. Like Gail and I have a vault where all the passwords that access all of our financial information and accounts. If I drop dead tomorrow, she's still got access to all the passwords. And I tell you where that becomes relevant is, like, my parents right now, they're 88. My dad will be 89 this year. And, theirs are in books, and then they can't read their handwriting and they can't figure it out. So we're building them a vault in 1Password. They won't use it, and that's fine, but we'll have it.
Yeah,
that's
great.
what I'm after. But 1Password is a great tool for that.
Okay, that's great.
Is that what you use?
My husband has been trying to get me on it, and I still haven't handwritten.
Well,
do.
there's a lot of people that do that. Not every, but one password is so easy because it will automatically fill it in, and so you
Yeah.
can create these really complex passwords. Like mine always have 20 random characters made up
Yeah.
of symbols and numbers and letters.
Yeah.
So it makes it very hard to guess or to crack. But I don't have to worry about that. I don't think about it. The computer just plugs it in. I can use what's called two-factor authentication.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's I can use that on every site that'll allow it, but without having to really think about it.
That's great. I love it. I think we're out of questions,
All right.
but this has been so helpful. And I hope we would love to hear more feedback from people. If you've listened to this podcast and there are further questions you have or things that your parish or your organization are doing that would be good to share with us so that we can share with many more people. We'd love to hear it. We're always looking for bright light stories or questions that you want us to tackle. We would love that. We so appreciate you joining us. We will be back here again, God willing, next week at the same time. We plan to discuss the challenge of people who talk too much and what to do about them. Deacon Michael will share 6 steps for fostering two-way communication and facilitating powerful conversations. Deacon Michael, as we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really excited about starting next week because we're going to talk about the common obstacles, people obstacles that we face in trying to facilitate better communication. And we've all had this experience where somebody dominates the conversation, they talk too much. We'll get into, later weeks, what about those people that never talk? But in this case, it's the people that talk too much. So, just my final wrap up on technology is, there's probably a technology solution that would make whatever you're trying to do faster, easier, and cheaper. And, if you're not good at technology, if you're a little bit technophobic, then try to find somebody in your church. This would be a great ministry for somebody in your church that has some technical capabilities and could use that in the service of Christ and his kingdom. So don't be afraid to ask, as the pastor or as the CEO or as the executive director, you don't have to do all things well. You only have to do a few things well. And there's probably people on your team that you're not using the resources. They're probably right under your nose. You just got to ask.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deacon Michael. Grateful for your time and wisdom.
Thank you, Ann. We'll see you guys next week.